Section 26 of History of Egypt, Volume 1, by Gaston Maspero. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Chapter 3: The Legendary History of Egypt, Part 10. Extracts from it were inscribed in the temples, or even in the tombs of private persons, and 3 of these abridged catalogues are still extant, 2 coming from the temples of Seti I and Ramses II at Abydos, while the other was discovered in the tomb of a person of rank named Tunari at Saqqara. They divided this interminable succession of often problematical personages into dynasties, following in this division rules of which we are ignorant, and which varied in the course of ages. In the time of the Ramessides, names in the list which subsequently under Lagades formed 5 groups, were made to constitute one single dynasty. Manetho of Sebennytus, who wrote a history of Europe for the use of Alexandrine Greeks, had adopted, on some unknown authority, a division of 31 dynasties from Menes to the Macedonian conquest, and his system has prevailed, not indeed on account of its excellence, but because it is the only complete one which has come down to us. All the families inscribed in his list ruled in succession. The country was no doubt frequently broken up into a dozen or more independent states, each possessing its own kings during several generations, but the annalists had from the outset discarded these collateral lines, and recognized only one legitimate dynasty, of which the rest were but vassals. Their theory of legitimacy does not always agree with actual history, and the particular line of princes which they rejected as usurpers represented at times the only family possessing true rights to the crown. In Egypt as elsewhere, the official chroniclers were often obliged to accommodate the past to the exigencies of the present, and to manipulate the annals to suit the reigning party, while obeying their orders the chroniclers deceived posterity, and it is only by a rare chance that we can succeed in detecting them in the act of falsification, and can re establish the truth. The system of Manetho, in the state in which it has been handed down to us by epitomizers, has rendered, and continues to render, service to science. If it is not the actual history of Egypt, it is a sufficiently faithful substitute to warrant our not neglecting it, when we wish to understand and reconstruct the sequence of events. His dynasties furnish the necessary framework for most of the events and revolutions, of which the monuments have preserved us a record. At the outset, the centre to which the affairs of the country gravitated was in the extreme north of the valley. The principality which extended from the entrance of the Fayum to the apex of the Delta, and subsequently to the town of Memphis itself, imposed their sovereigns upon the remaining nomes, served as an emporium for commerce and national industries, and received homage and tribute from neighbouring peoples. About the time of the 6th dynasty this centre of gravity was displaced, and tended towards the interior; it was arrested for a short time at Heracleopolis (9th and 10th dynasties), and ended by fixing itself at Thebes (11th dynasty). From henceforth Thebes became the capital, and furnished Egypt with her rulers. With the exception of the 14th Zayat dynasty, all the families occupying the throne from the 11th to the 20th dynasty were Theban. When the barbarian shepherds invaded Africa from Asia, the Thebaid became the last refuge and bulwark of Egyptian nationality; its chiefs struggled for many centuries against the conquerors before they were able to deliver the rest of the valley. It was a Theban dynasty, the 18th, which inaugurated the era of foreign conquest, but after the 19th, a movement, the reverse of that which had taken place towards the end of the first period, brought back the centre of gravity, little by little, towards the north of the country. From the time of the 21st dynasty, Thebes ceased to hold the position of capital; Tanis, Bubastis, Mendes, Sebennytos, and above all Sais, disputed the supremacy with each other, and political life was concentrated in the maritime provinces. Those of the interior, ruined by Ethiopian and Assyrian invasions, lost their influence and gradually dwindled away. Thebes became impoverished and depopulated; it fell into ruins, and soon was nothing more than a resort for devotees or travellers. The history of Egypt is, therefore, divided into 3 periods, each corresponding to the suzerainty of a town or principality. 1. The Memphite period, usually called the Ancient Empire, from the 1st to the 10th dynasty. Kings of Memphite origin ruled over the whole of Egypt during the greater part of this epoch. 2. Theban period, from the 11th to the 20th dynasty. It is divided into 2 parts by the invasion of the shepherds (16th dynasty). 2a. The First Theban Empire, Middle Empire, from the 11th to the 14th dynasty. 2b. The New Theban Empire, from the 17th to the 20th dynasty. 3. Saite period, from the 21st to the 30th dynasty, divided into two unequal parts by the Persian conquest. 3a. The First Saite period, from the 21st to the 26th dynasty. The Second Saite period, from the 28th to the 30th dynasty. The Memphites had created the monarchy. The Thebans extended the rule of Egypt far and wide, and made of her a conquering state. For nearly 6 centuries she ruled over the Upper Nile and over Western Asia. Under the Saites she retired gradually within her natural frontiers, and from having been aggressive became assailed, and suffered herself to be crushed in turn by all the nations she had once oppressed. The monuments have as yet yielded no account of the events which tended to unite the country under the rule of one man. We can only surmise that the feudal principalities had gradually been drawn together into two groups, each of which formed a separate kingdom. Heliopolis became the chief focus in the north, from which civilization radiated over the rich plains and the marshes of the Delta. Its colleges of priests had collected, condensed, and arranged the principal myths of the local religions. The Aeneid to which it gave conception would never have obtained the popularity which we must acknowledge it had, if its princes had not exercised, for at least some period, an actual suzerainty over the neighbouring plains. It was around Heliopolis that the kingdom of Lower Egypt was organized. Everything there bore traces of Heliopolitan theories: the protocol of the kings, their supposed descent from Ra, the enthusiastic worship which they offered to the sun. The Delta, owing to its compact and restricted area, was aptly suited for government from one centre. The Nile Valley proper, narrow, tortuous, and stretching like a thin strip on either bank of the river, did not lend itself to so complete a unity. It too represented a single kingdom, having the reed and the lotus for its emblems, but its component parts were more loosely united, its religion was less systematized, and it lacked a well-placed city to serve as a political and sacerdotal centre. Hermopolis contained schools of theologians who certainly played an important part in the development of myths and dogmas, but the influence of its rulers was never widely felt. In the south, Siut disputed their supremacy, and Heracleopolis stopped their road to the north. These three cities thwarted and neutralized one another, and not one of them ever succeeded in obtaining a lasting authority over Upper Egypt. Each of the two kingdoms had its own natural advantages and its system of government, which gave to it a particular character, and stamped it, as it were, with a distinct personality down to its latest days. The kingdom of Upper Egypt was more powerful, richer, better populated, and was governed apparently by more active and enterprising rulers. It is to one of the latter, Mini or Menes of Thinis, that tradition ascribes the honour of having fused the two Egypts into a single empire, and having inaugurated the reign of the human dynasties. Thinis figured in the historic period as one of the least of Egyptian cities. It barely maintained an existence on the left bank of the Nile, if not on the exact spot now occupied by Gerga, at least only a short distance from it. The principality of the Osirian reliquary, of which it was the metropolis, occupied the valley from one mountain range to the other, and gradually extended across the desert as far as the great Theban oasis. Its inhabitants worshipped a sky god, Anhuri, or rather two twin gods, Anhuri-Shu, who were speedily amalgamated with the solar deities and became a warlike personification of Ra. Anhuri-Shu, like all the other solar manifestations, came to be associated with a goddess having the form or head of a lioness, a Sokhit, who took for the occasion the epithet of Mihit, the northern one. Some of the dead from this city are buried on the other side of the Nile, near the modern village of Meshek, at the foot of the Arabian chain, whose steep cliffs here approach somewhat near the river. The principal necropolis was at some distance to the east, near the sacred town of Abydos. It would appear that, at the outset, Abydos was the capital of the country, for the entire nome bore the same name as the city, and had adopted for its symbol the representation of the reliquary in which the god reposed. In very early times Abydos fell into decay, and resigned its political rank to Thinis, but its religious importance remained unimpaired. The city occupied a long and narrow strip of land between the canal and the first slopes of the Libyan mountains. A brick fortress defended it from the incursions of the Bedouin, and beside it the temple of the god of the dead reared its naked walls. Here Anhuri, having passed from life to death, was worshipped under the name of Khontamenteit, the chief of that western region whither souls repair on quitting this earth. It is impossible to say by what blending of doctrines or by what political combinations this son of the night came to be identified with Osiris of Mendes, since the fusion dates back to a very remote antiquity. It had become an established fact long before the most ancient sacred books were compiled. Osiris Khontamenteit grew rapidly in popular favour, and his temple attracted annually an increasing number of pilgrims. The great oasis had been considered at first as a sort of mysterious paradise, whither the dead went in search of peace and happiness. It was called Uifk, the sepulchre. This name clung to it after it had become an actual Egyptian province, and the remembrance of its ancient purpose survived in the minds of the people, so that the cleft, or gorge in the mountain through which the doubles journeyed towards it, never ceased to be regarded as one of the gates of the other world. At the time of the New Year festivals, spirits flocked thither from all parts of the valley; they there awaited the coming of the dying sun, in order to embark with him and enter safely the dominions of Khontamenteit. Abydos, even before the historic period, was the only town, and its god the only god, whose worship, practised by all Egyptians, inspired them all with an equal devotion. The excavations of the last few years have brought to light some, at all events, of the oldest Pharaohs known to the Egyptian annalists, namely, those whom they placed in their first human dynasties, and the locality where the monuments of these princes were discovered shows us that these writers were correct in representing Thinis as playing an important part in the history of the early ages of their country. In the tomb of Menes, that sovereign whom we are inclined to look upon as the first king of the official lists, lies near the village of Nagada, not far from Thebes; those of his immediate successors are close to Thinis, in the cemeteries of Abydos. They stand at the very foot of the Libyan hills, near the entrance to the ravine, the cleft through which the mysterious oasis was reached, and thither the souls flocked in order that they might enter by a safe way the land beyond the grave. The mass of pottery, whole and broken, which has accumulated on this site from the offerings of centuries, has obtained for it among the Fellahin the name of el Gaab, the mother of pots. The tombs lie there in serried ranks. They present for the most part a rough model of the pyramids of the Memphite period, rectangular structures of bricks without mortar rising slightly above the level of the plain. The funeral chamber occupies the centre of each, and is partly hollowed out of the soil, like a shallow well, the sides being bricked. It had a flat timber roof, covered by a layer of about 3 feet of sand; the floor was also of wood, and in several cases the remains of the beams of both ceiling and pavement have been brought to light. The body of the royal inmate was laid in the middle of the chamber, surrounded by its funeral furniture and by a part of the offerings. The remainder was placed in the little rooms which opened out of the principal vault, sometimes on the same level, sometimes on one higher than itself. After their contents had been laid within them, the entrance to these rooms was generally walled up. Human bodies have been found inside them, probably those of slaves killed at the funeral, that they might wait upon the dead in his life beyond the grave. The objects placed in these chambers were mostly offerings, but besides these there were coarse stellae, bearing the name of a person, and dedicated to the double of his luminary. Some of them mention a dwarf, or a favourite dog of the sovereign, who accompanied his master into the tomb. Tablets of ivory or bone skilfully incised furnish us with scenes representing some of the ceremonies of the deification of the king in his lifetime, and the sacrifices offered at the time of his burial; in rarer instances they record his exploits. End of Section 26. Read by Professor Heather and By. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.